Welcome back, everyone, to the Kriya Yoga Podcast. In today's episode, we're going to listen to a class that was released on June 1st, 2026. It's part of a preparation for Samadhi course that we're offering through the Kriya Yoga Online Patreon community. In this class, we are going to explore Sutra 1.38, which relates to gaining knowledge through dreams and sleep. This is the dream yoga that Patanjali talks about. Now, this isn't the intensive type of dream yoga you might be familiar with through Buddhist practices. This is merely an indication of how to help clarify your mind, calm your field of consciousness so that you can gain access to subtler states of your being, gain awareness of what you are as pure consciousness. This is one of the stages of the Chitta Prasadhanam Sutras. I'm sure you've already heard me talk about this a lot, but the Chitta Prasadhanam Sutras from Chapter 1, Pada 1 of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras are a step-by-step progression to allow you to experience Samadhi more regularly. That's why this is part of the preparation for Samadhi course. So I hope that you find this class helpful, that it helps to give you greater insights into a way to reflect upon deep sleep and your dreaming states so that your self-realization path becomes more accessible and that you're able to maintain the trajectory of your practice, not just when you're awake, but also possibly into your dreaming and deep sleep states as well. If you'd like to learn more about this preparation for Samadhi course and gain access to the previous 6 classes, consider becoming a supporter of our Patreon community, patreon.com/Kriya Yoga. Supporters of this community make possible this podcast, our videos on YouTube, and also allow us to provide scholarships for those students in need who want to go on retreat and learn Kriya Yoga with us. All right, well, here's our class. Preparation for Samadhi. Class 7. Sleep Dreams and Yoga Meditation. We're currently on Sutra 1.38, and Sutra 1.38 states that our field of awareness, our chitta, is clarified by knowledge of dreams and sleep. And what this sutra is pointing to is our capacity to cultivate awareness through those states where our field of consciousness usually goes dark, becomes dim, becomes distracted or unconscious. Now, in Yoga Sutra 1.10, sleep is defined as a vritti, or a fluctuation, a movement within the mind. And because it's a fluctuation, it can function as an obstacle to our capacity for samadhi. And this occurs when sleep pulls us into a state of unconsciousness. However, these vrittis, they can serve as supports to allow us to experience samadhi. And in this case, in this particular Sutra 1.38, we see that sleep can become such a support when we find a way to either remain present during the sleep state and the dreaming state, or when we can use a contemplation of our dreams to recognize that we are and that there is a seer that is always there, always observing the dreams, the changes, the states of the body. When we can approach sleep from this vantage point, then it becomes an opportunity to recognize our awareness as it persists through all states. Now, this Sutra 138 connects directly to 132. And what does 132 mention? It mentions practicing a single truth. When we make an effort to practice a single truth, our mind becomes one-pointed. Our capacity for meditation and yoga practice becomes amplified. And so if we start thinking about our dreams, start thinking about our sleep, when we start turning this curiosity into a gateway of understanding, we are in a way practicing a single truth, again through the contemplation of sleep and dreams. Now, most people pass through these states, these changing experiences of sleep and dreams without awareness. They might remember it later on, but they're not really present when it's happening. But one thing happens for a yogi, and you might have already noticed this. You might have already noticed that after many years of meditating, after many years of practicing, just simply being more conscious and aware, that in your dreams, you might notice that you are dreaming more often. Or maybe your dreams become less defining. You're in the dream, something happens, and there's a part of you, it might not be 100% conscious, but it knows that it's a dream. And so it doesn't become overly disturbed by difficult things that arise in this experience. Even during the day, you might start to notice when you begin to daydream or drift off. Whereas before, like most people, if you start to zone out or go into a daydream, it just happens. And then 5 minutes, 45 minutes, or 2 hours later, like, oh, where did I go? Well, those of you who've been practicing meditation for a while might start to catch that and see it much more quickly, so you don't get lost in these experiences during the day. You don't fall out of presence during the day. So Sutra 1.38 really encourages us to remain present in times when most people lose their presence. We learn to remain present as the body enters sleep. We learn to catch, recognize, and remain present during daydreams, those moments where we might zone out, or even in deep sleep. So this practice helps to remove the obstacles that keep us from existing in pristine present moment awareness. It reveals that our awareness can continue even when these normal structures of waking experience begin to dissolve. So when this becomes clearer, when this becomes more regular, the mind is less captured or defined by its usual fluctuations and changes. You become free of these vrittis, these changes within the field of consciousness. This practice, it can be engaged by anyone. Anyone can start thinking in this way, being curious about their dreams, observing as they start to fall asleep. But we have to remember that this capacity becomes much easier and much more effective because we have practiced the 5 previous sutras within this Chitta Prasadanam series. So it becomes much easier if we followed the framework of the previous 5 sutras. When we follow these stages that Patanjali has outlined, practicing each one in order and becoming familiar with the fruits of each contemplation, we start to find our way into calmer and clearer states. And so by the time we reach Sutra 138, the knowledge of dreams and sleep, we've already built up the skill and capacity to navigate and maintain awareness within dreams and sleep. It's like you've already become subtle, you've already become able to recognize the nuances in these changing, fluctuating states between dream and sleep. So now it becomes just more natural to say, oh, I see my body's falling asleep. Here comes a dream. I'm still present. Now, you might not necessarily have that inner commentary going on. You could, but usually it's just something you notice. You don't have to talk about it to yourself. And this whole process essentially is simply about becoming curious and aware of how our consciousness remains present even during states such as sleep, when most people are not aware at all. So through this inquiry, it becomes clear that our true nature is pure consciousness. It is the witness, it is the Purusha, which is eternal, timeless, ever free. We can call it infinite spirit, but we start to recognize that this reality of ourselves is present through all of these changes, through all of these states. And this knowledge, not just the knowledge, but this knowledge and this experience, this is what encourages a greater wisdom. It tends to encourage a freedom from pain. And that's mainly because we're no longer overwhelmed or defined by anything that can be seen or experienced. So we're not defined by the dramas of our life. We're not defined by the fluctuating emotions that come and go. Just like we're not defined by the fluctuating pleasant dreams or the fluctuating nightmares that come and go. We just see this is something that's playing across the field of our awareness. And this is really just such a simple thing. It's about being curious, stepping back, observing, watching. When I used to lead meditations down Asheville at the Kriya Yoga Meditation Center we had down there, I would often end a meditation by encouraging individuals to observe the fact that what they are as the seer is present right now in meditation. Everything that's going on, they are aware of that. There's a seer that is aware of that. And I would encourage them to think back to what were they doing before they came to the meditation center? What were they eating? Who were they talking to? Well, in order for them to know that, there had to be a seer present within that experience, observing, watching. And we could keep going back through this process, but I would eventually get to the point where I'd say, well, think about your dreams, the dreams you had last night, or the intense dream you had 5 days ago. Well, even though you weren't necessarily active within that dream, meaning you weren't willfully doing anything, you were observing it passing before you. And so what was that seer, that presence, which experienced that and is actually actively remembering it right now? So that seer, that witness that persists through the present moment, you listening to this class, to what you were doing 3 hours ago or 4 days ago or 2 years ago, well, whatever those memories are, there was a seer present. And you can reflect upon the dreams that you had, the dreams that you remember. Even though you weren't actively, willfully engaged in them, it was flowing in front of something. It was flowing in front of the seer, which was observing the experience. And that simple contemplation alone will start to get the gears turning, where you'll start to recognize, oh, wait a minute, so there is a seer, clearly, which is present through all of this. I'm not always aware of it. I'm not always necessarily paying attention to that, but it's true. So this contemplation, while we could get into very extensive methodologies for how to do this, really is just about being curious and observing and being consistently curious. Because if you do that through time, over days, weeks, months, even a year, let's just do it for three months, let's say. If you were just curious about this experience, reflecting upon your dreams, well, who was the seer that watched that? Just do a little each day. Eventually that starts to open up this deeper understanding, and it becomes more present. You become more conscious. And then eventually when you're dreaming, you're like, oh, look, here it is. I'm dreaming. I know it now. So you gain access to this. And it's very simple, it's very subtle, but it can have a really profound effect on your life in a very positive way. That's why it's within these Chitta Prasadanam Sutras, about making the mind serene and clarifying Chitta. Now, in our previous preparation for Samadhi classes, we explored a series of practices that unfold in a very precise and purposeful order. Each sutra builds upon the previous one, and they gradually refine the mind, stabilize the awareness, and prepare the yogi, you, for deeper absorption, prepare you for a consistent experience of Samadhi. In Sutra 1.33, the very first one of all these sutras, this tells us how to make the mind serene in relationship to the dramas of the world and worldly experience. And so Patanjali tells us that if we contemplate, if we remember, if we feel very deeply a sense of friendliness towards happy experiences, if we are flexible, and when there is pain, we can express compassion for ourselves and for others. When we see virtue, we see someone doing something good, supportive, wholesome within the world or in their life, we can bring up a sense of elation, and then practicing neutrality, or just letting it go, not letting it bother you, towards non-virtue, by spending time in a meditative practice, really going through these experiences and contemplating them. This is the first step to making the mind serene and preparing the mind for Samadhi. Because what does this do? This gives us the capacity to remain present during pleasure, pain, virtue, confusion, success, failure, harmony, disharmony, rather than getting pulled into it. So Patanjali is not saying you're going to make the world perfect. Patanjali is saying in these particular experiences, here's what you can do. And through that process, you will be less disturbed, you will become more peaceful, and it will be easier for you to experience depth within your meditation practice. Now, once that becomes something that you feel skillful at, you feel like, okay, I've got a good handle on this at the moment, then you'd move on to Sutra 134. And this introduces the contemplative process of breath awareness. Now that the dramas of life aren't yanking your mind here and there, well, now is the time where you settle in on the breath. The breath becomes the entry point into inner peace. And that's because the mind has already become serene by releasing these dramas. And at this stage, the breath becomes very effectively a doorway to inner stillness, a means to balancing the life force, a bridge between the mind, the body, and the subtle field of consciousness. So when the energy, the breath, the prana, when they become balanced through success in this contemplative practice, now we go to the next stage. What's that? Sutra 135. This is where we gain greater access to the dynamics of our inner energy field. The senses become more refined. Our awareness becomes more subtle. We are more internalized. The dramas of the world, we've worked with that. We've studied the mind, the breath, the prana, and now we can turn within, feel more fully. And this allows us to practice pratyahara, internalization of attention. And this greater sensitivity prepares us for the next stage, which is what? Actually experiencing inner luminosity and a state that is free of sorrow. This is related to Sutra 136. So as your field, as your mind becomes more calm, more refined, the inner light, Om, a sense of inner buoyancy and joy naturally manifests. Some people have been instructed to practice Jyoti Mudra, one of the Kriya Yoga techniques, by pushing on their eyeballs to see inner light. Well, that's not how you do it. That's cheating. All you're doing is stimulating your optic nerve. That's not spiritually beneficial, nor is it probably healthy for your eyes. But what yogis find who have gone through this process of refinement is that when they are internalized, when they are calm and deeply sensitive, it's as if this light appears within their mind's eye, and there is a sense of buoyancy and spaciousness. And Patanjali knew this. All yogis know this. All spiritual adepts know this. The inner landscape, the inner terrain of our spiritual being is the same no matter what religion or no matter what practice. And what Patanjali has done is he simply organized, put it in such a beautiful, methodical, step-by-step fashion that it will lead you here. It will lead you here. And that's the Vishoka meditation that you might have heard about. But it comes from Sutra 136. And we have to remember that this sorrowless luminosity, it's not produced by emotional excitement, imagination. It's a revelation of a deeper spiritual presence and really a deeper spiritual sense of poise, balance, and calmness. So this field of inner luminosity becomes available to us once these previous stages have been cultivated. Now, from this buoyant, sorrowless, luminous field, Sutra 137 becomes natural to us. And what is Sutra 137 about? It's about understanding, feeling deeply the minds of those who are free of attachment. And freedom from attachment is no longer experienced as a forced struggle. I dealt with this, maybe you dealt with it too. You're young, you're learning about yoga, you start recognizing that non-attachment's a really big deal in this practice. So you start forcing yourself not to be attached to things. You start stepping back and forcing your discipline. Well, I'm not attached to that. I'm not attached to that. When deep down inside, you still really like the thing that you're trying to not be attached to. Well, the beautiful thing about this whole process is that freedom from attachment arises naturally because you start to feel calm, clear, peaceful, illuminated, not because of things, but from, well, I don't want to say an inner place, because it's not a place, it's just a state. But you feel it, you recognize it. And then all the stuff that you were substituting, you were using as a substitution to make you feel better, it doesn't really bind you so much anymore, because this feeling of well-being comes from something timeless, transcendent, and you've touched it, you've learned to experience it. So once we've made it to that place of being very calm inside, and if you can't see inner light, that's okay, because some people also are not visual. So I want to be very clear that when we talk about inner light, yes, it absolutely can be like a radiant sun within your mind's eye. But this inner luminosity that's most important is simply the light of awareness, the light of presence. So if you can become deeply absorbed in feeling the calmness, the presence within your body, there might not be a visual field of light there, but your awareness is light, luminosity, clarity. So being present within the heart, being present within the field of the body, that's acceptable too. And in the presence of this inner light, this inner clarity, the baggage that binds you to anxiety and frustration and grasping and resistance, that all dissolves. And then we become more capable of understanding what it feels like to be in a spiritually free state. So the mind becomes inspired by those who are free of attachment. And in our tradition, in the yogic tradition, usually these are the teachers or the saints and the sages who demonstrate a life free of attachment. For example, when I've been around my teachers, well, they're a representative of that state. And so by attuning to their mind, thinking how they think, it becomes easier for me to notice that as well. And even if you're not fortunate enough to have a living teacher at this time, you can contemplate the states of those who are inspiring. For example, there are many yogis, well, there aren't that many, there are a handful of yogis whom I've never met because they died before I was born, or they passed on before I discovered their work. But by reading their writings or listening to their lectures, or even with the photograph of Ramana Maharshi, I don't even have to read his books. I just look at the huge poster that I have, and my mind naturally flows into that state of freedom from attachment. This becomes more accessible to you once you've gone through the processes that we've been describing. And this is what Sutra 1.37 is talking about. So this whole step-by-step process, this whole movement, moving from Sutra 1.33 onward through the Chitta Prasadam Sutras, what does it do? First, it develops a serenity within the mind due to the dramas of the world. Once that's become stable enough, now it's never, well, it will be perfect eventually, but you might not be perfect at it all the time. But you become stable enough that you have this serenity of mind. Then through directing your awareness to the breath, sensitivity to the breath, our prana becomes balanced. Once that becomes balanced, we can feel more deeply into the field of the body. Our sensitivity is refined. The next stage, we start to feel, experience inner luminosity, a sense of sorrowlessness, buoyancy, and clarity. And that gives us a capacity to really understand what it means to be in the presence of a spiritually free consciousness, or to really understand what these inspirational figures on our spiritual path, what they know, what they experience due to their own inner work and inner grace. So the culmination of this step-by-step inner exploration naturally leads us to where we are now, Sutra 1.38, where we begin to invite the experience of remaining present, not just during our waking life, and not just during deep states of meditation, but also during those moments when the physical body rests and dreams. And so through knowledge of dreams and sleep, this field of awareness becomes further clarified. And this is really a profound development in practice. This is what a lot of people are aiming for when they teach classes on Yoga Nidra, and it's wonderful to cultivate that. But if you can match all of this background information, all these background practices with this process, what's being taught as Yoga Nidra will become more accessible and more spiritual liberating for you. So here, the yogi is observing awareness so that it can remain present through all states. And when our awareness can remain present through all states, here's what we recognize. The waking experiences arise and pass. The dream experiences arise and pass. The deep sleep arises as a state in which our normal, ordinary mental content is absent, but awareness itself remains always as the silent witness through all of these changing states. And it's through this that we begin to experience the possibility that yogis refer to, which is remaining self-aware through the waking, the dreaming, and the deep sleep states. And this doesn't arise by force. It becomes possible because of our previous contemplations. They've already refined the mind and prepared the field of consciousness. And so, once again, the sequence from Sutra 133 to 138 forms a pyramid of practice. It forms a pyramid of practice. Serenity in relationship to worldly experience supports meditation on the breath. Meditation on the breath balances our prana. Balanced prana refines our inner sensitivity. Refined sensitivity reveals sorrowless luminosity. Sorrowless luminosity makes freedom from attachment more natural. Freedom from attachment prepares the mind to remain aware through dreams, deep sleep states, and really all states of consciousness. Now, through this whole process, we have to remember the purpose of these practices. It's not just to have interesting experiences. The purpose is to prepare the ground of your practice for samadhi. So as this field of consciousness becomes more serene, subtle, luminous, unattached, and continuous through the changing states, then you become increasingly capable of stable absorption. And because of that, samadhi becomes a natural flowering of your mind. I mean, that's a pretty way of saying it, but you get the idea. Because your mind has been purified, refined, and trained to rest in the truth of your awareness. So through these sutras, what Patanjali is doing is giving us a practical map. The journey begins with how we relate to experience of daily life, and it moves through to the deepest inquiry into consciousness itself. So by practicing each step in order and becoming established in the fruit of each contemplation, you prepare yourselves for the consistent experience of samadhi and for the direct recognition of your true nature, your ever-free, conscious witness, the self, the seer, spirit. And we have to remember that if you find one of these contemplations difficult, meaning if you think to yourself, I've read through all of these, I just want to jump to the sorrowless and luminous state, and you skip the ones before it, but you find that to be difficult, well, what you have to do is go back to the previous contemplation and get established there first, because each practice prepares the ground for the next one. So if you're struggling with sorrowless and luminous contemplation, well, what do you need to do? You need to go back and you need to consider Sutra 135. You need to feel more deeply into the body, to relax more deeply into the body and remain present. Well, you say, well, I can't do that either. All right, well, what do? Well, you go back and you say, well, let's focus on some pranayama. Let me get really smooth and engaged in this flow of pranayama and this flow of breath. And that works for you. Okay, so you work on that, you get good at that until you try to take another step forward, back into feeling deeply into the body, back into what Sutra 135 represents. And if you have trouble with all of these, usually it means you need to go back to Sutra 133 and focus on those contemplations. So it all goes together. It all fits like a puzzle. And if you have the right pieces, you stick them together, it's going to make a picture that you understand. If not, start with the one piece that you have that you can work with and develop that first. Now let's take a minute to just review or consider or think about, how do you practice knowledge of dreams and sleep? Well, a good way to begin practicing is simply to become curious about trying to remain present as you're taking a nap, meaning you're letting your body completely relax, but you just try to stay present and watch it, like you're curious about what happens as the mind begins to drift into dream, or the body begins to twitch as it releases some kind of tension. But you're just observing, letting everything relax. So that can be a good introductory point. You can also do this during Hatha Yoga. So if you do a Hatha Yoga routine and do shavasana afterwards, during that relaxation in shavasana, give yourself some time and let yourself relax so deeply and keep your attention at the heart and at the spiritual eye, gently resting as though you can feel the heart and the spiritual eye, and watch the body and the mind go into sleep around that. Now, you might only catch a brief observation of presence until eventually you lose consciousness. But the more you try with curiosity, you'll start to be awake for longer. You might go through a whole 20-minute shavasana. Instead of falling asleep, you notice that you've been present that whole time. The same thing can happen when you're trying to take a nap, a quick power nap. Just let the body rest. You can still remain present. And again, it can be helpful to keep your attention on the heart and on the spiritual eye. Not with strain, not with any kind of tension, just as though it's your anchor point. And if you hold your awareness there and let the body fall asleep, you'll catch more and more moments of, oh, my body's asleep. Was that me snoring? Oh, look at that dream. And that will start to encourage this understanding, this knowledge of dreams and sleep. You can also spend time contemplating dreams after you wake up. Just simply remember your dreams and don't overanalyze them. This isn't about trying to figure out your inner psychology through your dreams. It's more about noticing the structure of experience. So if you wake up and you recall your dreams, like, well, I remember those. I wasn't really actively participating, but clearly the seer was there in those dreams. So you're more putting attention on the fact that the seer was functioning, not necessarily the activity or the contents of the dream. And if you just do this a little bit every day, being curious, no strain, you don't have to turn it into a big deal, in time, you will start to understand why knowledge of dreams and sleep really helps you to remain present in all other states of your experience, all other states of your life. And so this kind of contemplation, it becomes a doorway into recognizing this witnessing presence, this eternality of spirit that remains through the waking, dreaming, and sleep states, all changing phenomena. And once again, as this occurs, this assists your ability to practice samadhi, to recognize it. And as you're navigating your meditation experience, you also don't get pulled into daydreams or distractions. So you're able to maintain a thought-free, superconscious, clear samadhi state because you have the capacity to remain present and not get distracted, not get pulled into other vrittis, fluctuations, or changes within the field of your awareness. So keep all of this in mind, review the material again, take notes, and then begin to incorporate what you've learned into your life, into your meditation, into your nap times, into your shavasana practices. And remember to refer back to the previous sutras or the previous classes in this preparation for samadhi class to help you adjust, tweak, navigate, strengthen the foundation of your yogic capacity to experience samadhi. Thank you for tuning into this episode of the Kriya Yoga Podcast. To learn more about Kriya Yoga meditation, you can visit us at kriyayogaonline.com, where you can find information about current book releases, online classes, and in-person retreats throughout the year. If you're interested in supporting this podcast, visit us at the Kriya Yoga Online Patreon community at patreon.com/Kriya Yoga.